The rain was coming down in hard, punishing sheets when Daniel Carter noticed the small body collapsed near the edge of the old highway. For a split second, he thought it was a pile of discarded clothes, something the city had forgotten like so many others. Then the lightning cracked across the sky, and he saw a pale hand twitch weakly against the wet asphalt. His heart stopped. He had nothing to give this world anymore except exhaustion and debt, yet in that moment, he knew with terrifying certainty that if he walked away, this girl would die before the storm passed. Before the story goes any further, take a moment right now. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one good act can change everything, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach the people who need the most. Daniel Carter was a man already worn thin by life. At 38, he carried the weight of a decade of loss on his shoulders. His wife, Emily, had passed away after a long illness, leaving him alone with their 6-year-old son, Noah, and a stack of hospital bills that never seemed to shrink. He worked nights as a janitor and days delivering groceries, sleeping in short, restless fragments whenever he could. Every dollar he earned was carefully counted, most of it going toward rent for their small, dim apartment and Noah's school lunches. Dreams were a luxury Daniel had buried alongside his wife. Survival was all that mattered now. That night, he had been walking home after a late shift, his shoes soaked through and his back aching, when he saw the girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her clothes were torn and muddy, her breathing shallow and uneven. Daniel knelt beside her without thinking, shrugging off his jacket to cover her trembling body even though the cold cut straight through his thin shirt. He had no phone with data, barely any credit left, and the nearest hospital was miles away. Still, he lifted her into his arms, ignoring the pain shooting through his spine, and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The rain blurred his vision, and fear gnawed him, fear that he wouldn't make it in time, fear that this responsibility would crush him just like everything else had. The girl stirred once, her lips moving soundlessly, and Daniel whispered reassurance even though he didn't know if she could hear him. All he could think of was Noah's face, how his son looked when he slept, and how he would want someone to do the same for his child if the world ever turned its back on him. By the time Daniel reached the emergency entrance of the hospital, his arms were numb and his legs shaking. Nurses rushed forward, taking the girl from him as doctors shouted instructions. Daniel stood there soaked and shivering, watching as she disappeared behind swinging doors. No one asked his name. No one thanked him. And he didn't stay to wait. He turned and walked back into the rain, because rent was due, because Noah would be waiting, because heroes, in Daniel's world, didn't exist. Only tired men who did what they had to do. Days passed. Life went on in its relentless, unforgiving way. Daniel scrubbed floors, lifted boxes, and counted coins at the kitchen table while Noah did his homework. He never mentioned the girl, not even to himself. It felt like a dream, something unreal that had no place in his harsh reality. But somewhere across the city, in a private hospital wing filled with quiet machines and anxious whispers, the girl he saved was waking up. Her name was Sophia Reynolds, and her disappearance had brought a city to a standstill. She was the only daughter of William Reynolds, a self-made billionaire whose name was attached to skyscrapers, charities, and political campaigns. Sophia had been kidnapped, held for ransom, and had escaped during a violent storm, collapsing from injuries and exposure before Daniel found her. When doctors told William that an unknown man had carried his daughter through the rain and vanished without leaving a name, the hardened businessman broke down in tears for the first time in decades. William searched tirelessly. Hospital records were reviewed. Security cameras were checked. Days turned into weeks. And then, one grainy image surfaced. A tired man with hollow eyes, carrying Sophia in his arms, his jacket draped over her like a shield. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The search narrowed, leading investigators to a run-down neighborhood most people like William never saw. When he finally stood outside Daniel's apartment building, staring up at peeling paint and cracked windows, he felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Guilt. Daniel was just returning from work when the black cars pulled up. For a brief, terrifying moment, he thought something terrible had happened to Noah. His hand shook as he climbed the stairs, only to find his son sitting safely inside, coloring quietly, watched over by a stranger in an expensive suit. And standing near the window was William Reynolds himself, eyes red, posture rigid, as if he were holding himself together by sheer will. What followed was overwhelming in ways Daniel couldn't process all at once. He learned who Sophia was, what his single act had meant, how close she had come to dying. William thanked him with a sincerity that money couldn't buy, his voice breaking as he spoke of fathers and fear and miracles. Daniel listened in silence, embarrassed by the attention, uncomfortable with praise. He tried to explain that he had only done what anyone should do, but even as he said it, he knew how many people would have walked away that night. The change didn't come like a sudden explosion. It came quietly, steadily, like dawn after a long night. William paid off Daniel's debts without hesitation. He secured medical care for Noah, better schooling, and offered Daniel a stable job within his company, one that respected his time as a father. But more than that, he offered friendship, respect, and something Daniel hadn't felt in years: dignity. Sophia visited often, her recovery slow but steady, her gratitude shining in every smile she gave the man who had saved her life without knowing who she was. Still, Daniel struggled. Accepting help felt like weakness. Nights were filled with doubt, with the fear that this kindness was temporary, that life would snatch it away like it had before. But each morning, when he watched Noah laugh freely, when he felt the absence of constant panic in his chest, he began to understand something profound. Kindness given freely has a way of returning, multiplied in ways we can never predict. Years later, Daniel would still remember that night in the rain, the weight of a fragile life in his arms, the choice he made without thinking. He would understand then that it wasn't about billionaires or rewards or recognition. It was about a moment when a broken man chose compassion over fear, and in doing so, unknowingly changed the course of many lives, including his own. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who believes in humanity, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can find their way into the world. And before this story ends, we have one special request for you. Please comment below and tell us what this story made you feel, or share a moment when kindness changed your life. Because sometimes, the smallest act of goodness, done by someone with nothing left to give, can become the reason hope survives in a world that desperately needs it. The morning Daniel Carter woke up in his new, unfamiliar apartment, sunlight streamed through wide windows instead of cracked blinds, and for a brief, disorienting second, he thought he was still dreaming. The room was quiet, clean, and warm in a way he had never known. Noah slept peacefully in the next room, wrapped in soft blankets instead of the thin ones Daniel had patched together over the years. Everything about this new life felt fragile to him, like glass that could shatter if he moved too fast or believed in it too deeply. Despite the support surrounding him, Daniel struggled with an old enemy that never truly leaves a man who has known poverty and loss: guilt. He questioned whether he deserved this comfort when so many others were still fighting just to survive. At work, even though his new position was steady and respected, he kept his head down, working harder than anyone else, afraid that a single mistake would send him and his son back into the shadows. He avoided attention, declined invitations, and lived as if the ground beneath him could collapse at any moment. Sophia Reynolds recovered slowly, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of her kidnapping had left invisible scars, and some days the fear returned without warning. Yet whenever she felt overwhelmed, she asked to see Daniel. Sitting across from him, she found a strange sense of safety, as if the man who had carried her through the storm still stood guard over her life. She admired his quiet strength, the way he listened more than he spoke, and the tenderness he showed Noah. In Daniel, she saw a kind of hero the world rarely celebrates. William Reynolds watched all of this carefully. For the first time in his life, wealth felt small compared to the depth of what Daniel had given. He began inviting Daniel into meetings, not as a token of gratitude, but because he valued his perspective. Daniel spoke honestly about struggle, about the invisible millions who lived one emergency away from ruin. Those conversations planted seeds. William started initiatives focused on emergency aid, shelters, and education for single parents, programs inspired not by boardroom strategies, but by Daniel's lived reality. Yet life tested Daniel again, as it always does. A rumor spread through the company, whispered by those who resented his sudden rise. They claimed he was only there because of pity, because of one lucky night, not merit. The words reached Daniel's ears and reopened old wounds. Doubt crept in, poisoning his confidence. He considered resigning, believing he was protecting his son from another inevitable fall. He began packing boxes quietly, planning to leave before he could be pushed. It was Sophia who stopped him. She had grown stronger, more confident, and her voice carried a clarity that cut through his fear. She reminded him, not with praise but with truth, that his worth had never been defined by circumstances. That night in the rain had revealed who he was, not made him. The courage he showed every day as a father mattered just as much. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to believe her. William addressed the company soon after, not to defend Daniel with emotion, but with facts. He spoke of integrity, of resilience, of the kind of leadership that comes from empathy rather than privilege. Without naming names, he made it clear that Daniel's presence was not charity, but a reminder of what real strength looked like. The whispers faded, replaced by respect. Years passed, and Daniel's life found a rhythm that felt both stable and meaningful. Noah grew into a confident young boy, proud of his father not for what he had, but for who he was. Sophia went on to study humanitarian work, her path shaped by the night she had been saved by a stranger with nothing to gain. And William, once defined solely by success, discovered a legacy rooted in compassion. One evening, as Daniel walked home beneath a gentle rain, he paused and looked up at the sky. The memory of that storm returned, but this time it didn't hurt. He understood now that broken beginnings do not prevent beautiful endings. They prepare us for them. If this continuation of the story moved you, reminded you of the quiet power of goodness, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. And before we close, we invite you to comment below and tell us whether you believe one selfless act can truly change a life. Because somewhere, on a dark road, in the middle of a storm, someone is waiting for proof that kindness still matters.